In this video, we're going to talk about a concept of object-oriented programming called encapsulation. We've already started talking about it technically, and encapsulation is the idea that we put all this data and the methods to operate on the data into this one file or part of a file called a class. Package them up together. I don't like using the word package because that means something different. But basically, we put it all in together. There's another part of encapsulation, especially if you've been a Java programmer or a C# programmer, and that is the idea that our data needs to be hidden from outside of our class. Okay, so those of you that have programmed in Java know that we treat fields as we make them all private. So something from outside of the class can't actually access things like name and wingspan. If in Java we would make those private, and since this code out here is not part of the class up here, this code couldn't technically access those instance variables. We do the same thing in C#. We make everything private, and then we provide methods called getters and setters so that people can get the current value of those. So they access those fields. In those languages, we access the fields through those getters and setters. Python doesn't really work that way. Python doesn't allow you to make self.name, self.wingspan. There's no way to make those private. People can access them directly. Python kind of trusts that programmers will do what they're supposed to do with the things that we provide for them. So if we don't want them to access things directly, we use an underscore. So what we do in Python, we don't want people to access our instance variables. We simply put an underscore in front of them. So let's create a new variable, instance variable. I am going to call it health. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add health as something people have to define. Our client code has to define when it makes an instance of a bird. But I'm going to make it optional. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set health equal to 50. So by default, when somebody makes a bird, they're not going to have to set the health. So it didn't make me provide health when I created my bird here, although I could provide health. So let me come down here. We'll print the bird wingspan. Let's print my bird.health as well. And I didn't bother doing this. Self.health equals health. Let's run this again. And you can see for my bird, it printed out the health was 50. Okay. If I wanted to, when I create the bird, I can provide a value. Let's put 75 there. And it sets it to 75. But if I don't provide the value, it will use the default value that I set up here. Okay. So how is that different than these? Well, it's not right now. So if we don't want people accessing the health directly, maybe I don't want people to be able to do this. My bird.health equals 15. Okay. Here I just set the bird's health to 15. Let me move that up. So it got set to 50 by default, then I access it directly and change it to 15. and it's set to 15, but I don't want people to necessarily access that data directly. I want them to do it through methods that I provide. So what do we do in Python? We put an underscore in front of the variable, and that tells people, hey, that variable is private. It doesn't tell them it's private. It's non-public is a better way to say it. It is not a public variable. You shouldn't access this variable because it has an underscore in front of it. Now, does that stop them from doing it? Absolutely not. So if I put underscore health there, they can still access and change that field directly. Okay. But if they do, they're taking the danger because that you could change your code at some point and not allow or even delete this backing field, this backing instance variable might even disappear where there's no guarantees of it. The underscore tells other programmers, don't use underscore health. Don't use this health directly. Use methods that I have provided for you for health. Okay. So what do we mean by that? If we're not supposed to do this, what do we mean? Well, maybe when the bird eats, right here the bird eats, we can add some health to the bird. Now this is our own class playing with this variable. Okay. So my bird eats. I'm going to copy this line down here so that after my bird eats, we'll look at its health again. Okay. Oh, I got an error. I believe that is because I forgot self here. There we go. So when I created Tweety, I had a health of 50 by default. Tweety ate some worms here, and when it ate worms, it added 5 to its health. I printed out Tweety's health again here, and I can see that it's now 55. So we're using the health variable in our other methods. And maybe we have another method called, maybe these are birds in a game. We'll have a method called take damage. Self dot, and it requires the person using it, the client code, self underscore health minus equals damage times 5. So after my bird eats, do this. My bird dot take damage. Maybe it got attacked by a predator of some kind. The neighbor's cat decided to bite off its wing. So it's going to take a damage of 5. But remember, that's going to subtract 25 from its health when that happens, because we used a formula in there. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to add 5 when it eats some worms, but then this ultimately will subtract 25, and its health should be down to 30. And it is. Okay. So this tells client code that this is a non-public variable. Do not access this variable directly. This variable will be used in other methods that will take care of increasing it, decreasing it as needed, or whatever needs to happen with it. So In Python, you don't need getters and setters. For you guys that have programmed Java and C# before, you don't need to have getters and setters, but you can have getters and setters. If you want to make getters and setters, you can feel free to do it. Technically, this is setting a new value, or and we can get values when we print out health. We can create methods to do that if we want to. So we can put maybe some validation. Hey, I got a bank account. We're keeping track of the balance. Don't let the bank balance go negative, right? So we don't let anybody set a balance to a negative number, okay? Or a deposit amount to a negative number. We can add that validation in those getters and setters, but you don't need to do that in Python. The things that you are allowed to use, you access directly. The instance variables, you access them directly. The ones that we don't want people to access directly, we put an underscore and we trust that they're going to follow the rules. That's very strange for people who have programmed in Java and C#. That's very strange that we say we're going to allow that, because it's best practice in those languages. Don't ever allow people direct access to your backing fields. But that's how Python works. That's how it was designed. Later on, we'll see some other ways with double underscores to do some things that's usually used in inheritance, and we'll talk about that in the inheritance video. So, encapsulation, we put all our data inside of our class. Our methods are inside of our class. We mark the fields that we don't want people to use directly in their client code. And we use methods to manage those fields.